Welcome to the British EuroRAP Results Launch 2020. My name is John Curtis and I'll be facilitating the event today. This is the first time we've undertaken one of our launches remotely, so I'd like to explain the programme for today and how you can be part of the interactive experience. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the formal launch. Please submit any questions you may have as soon as you have them in the question and answer area, and you'll see that at the bottom of your screen marked Q&A. And in there, you can type any questions you might have. If you'd like to promote somebody else's question to make sure that it gets asked, go into the Q&A box and you'll see a little thumbs up. Press that and it will become more popular. The most popular questions will be asked live. If you're watching the live YouTube stream, please comment to raise a question. Whilst our speakers are sharing their screen, you may find a gallery of speakers on your screen that is getting in the way of the slides. If you wish, you can minimize those videos so that you can see just the slides. And there's a small button at the top of that panel which will allow you to minimize them. Please be assured that if you do raise a question and it's not answered this afternoon, it will be answered over the coming days. Now, many thanks for listening. But unfortunately, I have some disappointing news that the Right Honourable the Lord Whitty, Chairman of the Road Safety Foundation, is unable to join us due to a clash with urgent House of Lords business. In anticipation of this, we recorded a pre-recorded speech earlier in the week.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining us at this virtual event and in such large numbers. I'd like to extend a warm welcome, particularly to our colleagues from all around the world. These unusual circumstances have at least given us an opportunity for greater international collaboration. The participation of our international college is particularly pertinent as a second United Nations Decade of Action for Road Safety was agreed less than 3 weeks ago, with a goal to halve road deaths by 2030. Today, we here launch the 20th annual British EuroRAP Risk Mapping and Performance Tracking results. I'm grateful to EuroRAP for their continuing support that makes this such an important annual report. We'll hear from EuroRAP and Middle will be speaking in a minute. Let me first recap what this report covers. When we first published, it covered 22,000 kilometres of motorways and A roads in Great Britain. This has now grown to 54,000 kilometres in this year's report. The EuroRAP network contains over 4,000 sections for which crash and traffic data are analysed over a period of 6 years. Over that time, Britain suffered more than 10,000 road deaths and 150,000 serious injuries. The network focuses on where deaths and serious injuries are concentrated. That's more than 13% of the network on which 60% of all road deaths occur. Over the last 20 years, not only has the EuroRAP network grown, but we've also seen changes in road safety. Deaths per million people in Britain have fallen, and the fatal and serious crash rate per kilometre driven on the network has fallen by well over half. These improvements in Britain has been attributed largely to advances in vehicle safety. But improvement in road infrastructure safety has not been so forthcoming. This year, less than 1% of road sections have shown significant improvement, and lately, road death numbers have actually stagnated. In 2018, the societal cost of road crashes was 36 billion. Britain's 27,000 annual road deaths and serious injuries impact families, businesses, and the NHS, long-term care, fire, police, ambulance, and the courts. We look back today to look forward and learn how we might contribute to the global efforts to halve road deaths by 2030. England's strategic road network, managed by Highways England, is the most intensely used of all Britain's main road networks. It's a very short network, only 4,500 miles long, but it carries a third of England's road travel. The systematic approach to manage road safety taken by Highways England, its regulation by the Office of Rail and Road, the aspiration to prevent all deaths and harm on its network by 2040, and the concrete safety performance targets in place are all very welcome. Even though this network is by far the safest per kilometre travelled, 250 people still lost their lives on this small mileage of road in 2018. The approach and goal setting is world class, but delivery of zero harm can only be met when plans turn into effective action. This report shows that years of work in Scotland during this last decade have delivered encouraging results. Scotland has set formal casualty reduction targets, and much more importantly, it has established the detailed partnerships to deliver them. Scotland's main road network is now safer than England's, and is also significantly safer than that of Wales. Scotland's devolved government, like that in Wales, manages a more extensive major route network of motorways and trunk roads from the centre. The government in England, too, has now proposed a major road network to complement the sparse network run by Highways England. This major road network, run by local authorities, will be part funded from the same pot, the National Roads Fund, sourced from vehicle excise duty. This newly defined major road network offers a significant opportunity to tackle road trauma. The major road networks is more than 4 times as risky to use as Highways England network. It carries just 1/3 of the travel that takes place on Highway England's network, yet there are a similar number of fatal crashes over a shorter total length. The opportunity for targeting safer investment from National Roads Fund is plain. The need to develop long-term goals and short-term targets for MRN is clear. There are, though, extremely compelling opportunities for safety investment across all the main road networks in Great Britain. Currently, the UK and the world faces unprecedented times as we seek to manage the COVID-19 pandemic and rebuild our economies. The government's first successful Safer Roads Fund supported a portfolio of 50 schemes across 30 local authorities. The Safer Roads Fund demonstrated these investments are quick to shovel, they have clear returns and benefits, and they are widely dispersed across the country, helping to deliver levelling up. Roads need investment to be reshaped for a healthier future. Safer active travel has become a priority to make sure that people are fitter and that we continue to reduce vehicle emissions. This report contains the latest data from which, as previously demonstrated, we offer a high-value programme of widely varying shapes, sizes and locations for immediate implementation. Shortly, Brian Lawton, the Charities Research and Programme Manager, will present the report, and then Susie Charman will comment in more detail on the investment portfolio. But firstly, I would like to ask Ant Middle, who is Ageas's Chief Executive Officer, to make some remarks from his perspective. The charity's partnership with Ageas has grown over the years and it works extraordinarily well. Ant Middle, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed for those very kind words, Lord Whitty. And may I just add our congratulations on reaching 20 years of risk mapping with this year's Road Safety Foundation report. As one of the UK's largest motor insurers, we fully support the recommendation that the report is making and the vital work that the charity does in campaigning for more significant investment in our roads. Our collaboration with the Road Safety Foundation began back. We're incredibly proud that our long-standing commitment will help to shape new approaches to enhance road safety. This is a topic clearly we care deeply about. With millions of customers driving on Britain's roads every day, road safety is a topic very close to our hearts at Ageas. We believe accumulating evidence, this evidence that we're accumulating is vital, because it will eventually lead to what we all want, and that's 0 deaths on Britain's roads. Our employees regularly handle the emotional impact and suffering of customers involved in serious road crashes. I've seen the compassion and professionalism they show as they help customers through the trauma that often follows road collisions. But we can only imagine what that's like for first responders, NHS workers and other key workers in the emergency services attending immediately after a road crash. It must be even more difficult now for NHS staff who are still dealing with the effects of a global pandemic. The societal impact of road crashes, as Lord Whitty rightly said, is massive. DFT's figures show that £1.8 billion a year is being diverted from the health budget to deal with preventable road crash injuries. Just think how useful that money would be within the NHS right now. In case you're wondering, it would pay for about 12,000 crewed ambulances, 64,000 junior nurses, or 2,500 intensive care beds for a year. For all these reasons, we support the Foundation by adding our voice to the calls for a sustained programme of work to improve the safety of our road infrastructure. And we now can look back on 20 years of work. And as we do so, one of the most heartening takeaways from the report launched today is the vast improvement in road safety in Britain. It's no coincidence that during the same period we've witnessed significant progress in vehicle safety. As a member of Thatcham Research, we've seen many new technologies that make cars safer and have reduced crashes on UK roads since 1997. They range from crumple zones and ABS, and most recently advanced driver assistance technology like auto emergency braking and lane assist. We also know technology advances in cars are only one of the factors affecting safe travel on the roads. The others are human behaviour and the road itself. And while autonomous vehicles operated entirely independently of the driver on some road types are in sight, we all see the potential for them to improve safety in the future, but a car park of these vehicles is still some way off. And nobody is infallible. Every driver makes mistakes, but sometimes a serious crash is invited by the poor layout of roads themselves, or the consequences of a crash made more serious by poor protection, such as a lack of safety fencing. 2 decades ago, Britain was a world leader in road safety performance. If we're going to top the table in the future, investment in safer road infrastructure is essential. As an international business, Ageas supports the Sustainable Development Goals, which aim to halve road deaths by 2030. We also emphatically applaud the aim of Highways England and Transport for London to move road trauma towards 0 by 2040. But what about right now? This year, we've seen extraordinarily disruptive change across our society. Who could have foreseen that a global pandemic would bring travel to a standstill this year? I guess one of the few upsides of the lockdown was the fall in the number of people killed and seriously injured on our roads. And from an insurance perspective, we certainly saw a sudden decrease in claims around road accidents from March to June compared to the same period last year, somewhat unsurprising. But we don't know yet what the full impact of the pandemic will be. Many of us have got used to working from home. Fewer are using public transport. We've seen significant changes in driving patterns, and there are lots more vulnerable road users as people walk and cycle more. So lots is changing. What is important, though, is that these trends, combined with a dip in the UK economy, do not mean we shouldn't invest in road safety in the post-COVID-19 era. In fact, quite the contrary. It means the risk is changing and roads need to reflect this. We need to prepare for a healthier future, for example, providing facilities for safer active travel, such as cycling, instead of using public transport. So we wholeheartedly support the investment packages proposed by the Road Safety Foundation. The current situation means historically low interest rates provide a unique opportunity to invest in Britain's road infrastructure. The investment packages address 10% of the road network with the highest potential returns, and together they could prevent more than 8,000 fatal or serious injuries over the next 20 years. As an insurer, we certainly know about the importance of managing risk, and so we welcome a proactive risk and performance approach to infrastructure safety. We've already seen the benefits of this approach in the Safer Roads Fund. It represented a significant step forward in improving 50 dangerous A road sections across 30 local authorities. So there is still much we can do to reduce deaths to zero as we move forward. We're committed to tackling the three main factors behind road safety, and that's driver behaviour, vehicles, and the road itself. Driver behaviour takes time to change, but advanced driver assistance technologies will themselves continue to improve and contribute to safer road environments. Combined with investment in road infrastructure, the current journey towards safer cars and safer roads will enable our long-term vision to be realised. There's no doubt that levels of uncertainty will continue in the months ahead as Britain responds to unknown economic and societal impacts from COVID-19. But there's one thing that we definitely can control, and that's improving Britain's road infrastructure and reshaping our roads for safer, active mobility. That's why we at Ageas are continuing our support of the Road Safety Foundation's programme of investment, and we very much hope that you will too. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Ant. I'd like to thank you for your speech and also for your support over the years, and of course to thank Lord Whitty for his speech. It falls now to Brian Lawton, the Road Safety Foundation's Research and Programme Manager, to present this year's results.
Thank you for the introduction, and good afternoon everyone. I'm pleased to be able to talk you through some of the results contained within the report that we've published today. Before I get into the crash risk mapping results themselves though, let me start with some context about Britain's road safety performance. This year is the 20th year of EuroRAP crash risk mapping results in Britain, as has already been mentioned by Lord Whitty amongst others. This graph shows the number of fatalities per million population in selected countries, calculated as 5-year rolling averages. The red or orange line, depending on the resolution on your screen, or the colour shading on your screen, red or orange, represents the United Kingdom's figures. 20 years ago, the UK had one of the lowest numbers of road deaths per head anywhere in the world. This has fallen by around half over the last 20 years to around 28 per million people today. Various countries, as already been mentioned, have been catching up with the UK. Spain and Slovenia, for example, shown in yellow and blue respectively, have substantially reduced the gap, and the number of road deaths per head in Ireland, shown in green, has well over halved. Norway, at the bottom of the graph, has improved from around the same level as the UK at the turn of the century to now be the clear frontrunner. Despite the improved record, the UK has fallen back to be amongst the chasing pack. Coming on to constituent countries of the United Kingdom, we see Northern Ireland here in green, almost catching up with the rest of the UK. England in red remains ahead of Scotland in blue and Wales in yellow. However, since 2010, the number of people killed on roads in Scotland has fallen by almost a quarter, compared with just a 2% reduction in England. We now come on to crash risk mapping itself. Firstly, for those who are less familiar with our work, our crash risk maps indicate the number of fatal and serious crashes, per vehicle kilometre, i.e. the individual road user risk, split into 5 bands. These range from the lowest risk in green, such as past the M5 that you can see here, through yellow, orange and red routes to the highest risk routes shown in black. Although we now include almost 4,000, we now include almost 4,000 routes in our analysis, covering all of Britain's motorways and A roads. Our network has evolved substantially over the last 20 years, including the addition of various urban routes for the first time last year. Many routes have been merged or split over the years, or even both, to ensure that our routes better reflect their layout, the way in which they're commonly used, and that our results remain statistically robust. Nonetheless, more than 400 routes with a total length of around 13,000 kilometres, are broadly the same as they were 20 years ago. On these routes, the number of fatal and serious crashes has reduced by almost a third, despite traffic on them increasing by more than half. In our report, you can actually see the differences between the results for this comparable network for the two time periods almost 20 years apart, using the same crash risk bandings for both time periods. Packaging up the lengths of roads of each banding on the comparable network. 20 years ago, high risk roads alone, shown in black, accounted for 8% of road length. Today, only around 1% now remain high risk, and only a further 5% are now in the medium to high risk group, shown in red. There's now almost 4 times the length of low risk roads, shown in green, compared with 20 years ago, with a further increase in the length of low to medium risk roads, shown in yellow. The improvement is consistent across most road types, and more than half of the comparable routes have improved by at least one band over the last 20 years. Moving on to this year's full results, as opposed to just the comparable network, here's an extract from the full map that we've published today on our website. Although the motorway and A road network represents only around 13% of Britain's road length, it accounts for some 60% of road deaths. You can access an interactive version of the map produced by our friends at Agilicis via our website, roadsafetyfoundation.org. Just go to Tools and then the Crash Risk Mapping Data Portal. Looking at the distribution of crash risk across the various routes, on this graph, risk increases as you move to the right, and the heights of the bars indicate the lengths within each band. Almost all motorways are low or low to medium risk, contained within the green and yellow bars. However, while there are some rural A roads which are also within these lower risk bands, there are plenty of others which are in the medium, medium to high, and even high risk bands. On high risk roads, fatal and serious crashes are typically more than 30 times as likely per mile driven as on low risk roads. We really want to be pushing roads from the right on the graph down to the left. And this similar looking graph shows the distribution just for the combination of strategic roads across Britain and the proposed major road network in England. As we'd expect, a much higher proportion of routes are already in the lower risk bands, with very few roads in the highest risk band. Coming on to crash types across the network as a whole. On urban roads, the most common crash type is crashes involving vulnerable road users. This category includes pedestrians, cyclists, and equestrians, with a further third being at junctions. On rural roads, without the same level of use by pedestrians and cyclists, the most common crash type is crashes at junctions. And on motorways, the most common crash type is rear-end shunts. Unsurprisingly, there are relatively few head-on crashes and crashes involving vulnerable road users on motorways. Out of our 4,000 routes, 22 routes significantly improved from the 2013 to 2015 period to the 2016 to 2018 period. And you can see 3 of them on this map of the area around Chester, Wrexham and Nantwich. The most improved route in England was the A534 in East Cheshire between Nantwich and Congleton, shown here in yellow, a 24-kilometre primarily urban single carriageway. A speed limit was reduced and improvements in junction design were made, and fatal and serious crashes fell from 37 to 14 between the two three-year periods, taking it from medium risk to low to medium risk. The most improved route in Wales was the A5104 in Denbighshire and Flintshire, shown here in orange, a 37-kilometre primarily rural single carriageway. Again, a speed limit was reduced and junction improvements were made. In addition, some speed cameras were introduced. Fatal and serious crashes fell from 25 to 8 between the 2 time periods, taking it from high risk to medium risk. The A51 between Chester and Nantwich was also significantly improved, again shown here in yellow, and is one of the most improved routes on the proposed major road network in England, fatal and serious crashes falling here from 23 to 18. Finally, there are 60 persistently higher risk routes this year, 38 of which are rural, including the top 10 listed here, all of which are single carriageways. There are also 22 persistently higher risk urban routes, such as the A420 connecting the A34 and the A40 in Oxfordshire. As well as meeting various criteria such as minimum length and crash density, these routes were classified as either medium to high risk or high risk, i.e. red or black, in successive 3-year periods, i.e. both 2013 to 15 and 2016 to 2018. Some of these routes have of course been improved by the relevant local authorities since our analysis period. 4 of these top 10, for example, are being improved thanks to funding from the DFT's Safer Roads Fund. And with that, I'll hand over to Dr. Susie Sharman, our Executive Director, to talk through a few more of our results and some of our recommendations.
Thanks very much, Brian. My presentation will take you through some national and regional comparisons, and then we'll highlight the main recommendations of the report, including the investment packages. So first, to the national and regional comparisons. In this part of the presentation, I'll run through very quickly some of the key charts that you can study in the reports in more detail. This graph shows the percentage change in crash rates by country from the first analysis period in 2013 to 15 to the second in 2016 to 18. Overall, on the EuroRAP network, the crash rate, which is the fatal and serious crashes per billion vehicle kilometres travelled, went up by 1%. This increase is solely attributable to roads in England. In both Scotland and Wales, the crash rate decreased, this improvement being particularly notable in Wales with a 12% reduction. This graph shows the percentage change in crash rate between the 2 analysis periods by country and split by strategic and other local A roads. Notice that in these analyses, we've combined strategic roads in England with the proposed major road network for a more equitable comparison with strategic roads in Scotland and Wales. The majority of the increase in crash rates in England is due to increases on local authority A roads. Most of the improvements in Scotland is on strategic roads, and there have been substantial improvements on both road networks in Wales. Looking at the percentage change in crash rates in England by region, we can see that the greatest improvements are from the southwest and the northwest. Performance continues to slip though in the West Midlands, the northeast, the east of England, and Yorkshire and the Humber. This graph shows the crash rate by country and network. In each country, the crash rate is lower on strategic roads than on other local authority A roads. The difference in risk between strategic and local roads is smallest in Wales. Local A roads that are not part of the major road network in England have the highest risk. When we split out the crash rate on strategic and major roads in England, you can see that the strategic road network has the lowest crash rate. It's around a quarter of that on the major road network. In this graph, you can see the number of crashes per 100 kilometres on the different networks in England, in Scotland and in Wales. This shows the concentration of crashes on a network. Crash density is much higher in England than in Scotland and Wales. Again, when we split out the SRN and the MRN, the strategic roads and major roads in England, we can see that crashes are most concentrated on the proposed major road network. However, crash density is still high on the strategic road network and other local A roads in England when compared to the Scottish and Welsh road networks. This graph shows the percentage change in crash density by network, by country, over the last 2 analysis periods. In England, crash density has increased on both networks. In Scotland, crash density has increased on local A roads, but fallen very slightly on strategic roads. In Wales, crash density has decreased on both networks. We have in the past suggested that the improvement we've noted in Scotland might be reflective of the way in which the National Casualty Reduction Strategy and targets have been adopted strongly by local authorities. More investigation is needed to determine why there has been a strong improvement in Wales and Scotland and why performance seems to be slipping a little in England. We now turn to the main recommendations of the report. Just to give a little bit of international context, Less than 3 weeks ago, the decade 2020 to 2030 was declared the second decade of action for road safety by the United Nations. And the Sustainable Development Goal has been renewed, so globally nations are now aiming to halve road deaths by 2030 from the 2021 baseline. The World Health Organization has developed 12 global road safety performance targets that sit below this. One of these is a target that all new roads should achieve a 3-star rating or something equivalent, like a road cross-section with a known high safety performance. A second infrastructure target that is at least 75% of travel on existing networks should achieve at least this minimum safety performance standard. Highways England and Transport for London have committed to achieving as close as possible to zero harm on the networks by 2040, and the Scottish and Welsh governments have adopted Vision Zero. Casualty reduction goals are in place on strategic roads in England, Scotland and Wales, and for the Transport for London road network. Highways England also has an infrastructure star rating performance indicator that is due to be refreshed soon following this year's EuroRAP survey of the whole of their network. In the meantime, the major road network has a crash rate around 4 times that of the strategic road network and has the highest crash density of all networks in the report, all over a relatively short network length of just over 8,000 kilometres. There are 50% more deaths and serious injuries on the proposed major road network in England as on the strategic road network, even though both networks are of similar length. So the first main recommendation of this report is that the major road network needs the same performance management approach of its sister strategic road network, including a long-term vision, for example, as close as possible to zero road deaths and serious injuries by 2045, concrete interim casualty reduction targets set to guide and measure performance towards the long-term vision, and a star rating performance indicator to measure and monitor the intrinsic safety performance of the roads every 5 years. Even under ordinary circumstances, there is a compelling case for road safety infrastructure investment because of the high cost to society of road crashes, some £36 billion every year. Currently, we face unprecedented times as we seek to rebuild the economy and manage the COVID-19 pandemic. But investing in infrastructure can help. Safety remedial schemes are quick to plan and implement, give certain returns, can be targeted to facilitate levelling up, and have a high employment density. At the same time, active travel is even more important. We need a fit and healthy population to combat the obesity crisis and to help us to fight COVID. So we need to invest in roads so they allow safe, active travel. We also need to make sure that roads allow us to reap the benefits of advanced driver assistance systems and in the longer term are ready for connected and autonomous vehicles. An investment portfolio for strategic, major and other local authority A roads is outlined in the report with a full map. The investment packages we've identified are based on a number of detailed assumptions described in full in the report. The investment portfolio could be slightly tailored if required so that funds were dispersed more equitably across the country. Overall, we've outlined a £1.2 billion investment across 5,000 kilometres of roads in England, Scotland and Wales. The returns should be good. We estimate that more than 8,000 fatal and serious injuries could be prevented over the next 20 years with an average benefit cost ratio of 3.6. The report outlines the proposed investment packages by country and network in a lot more detail. These packages test our commitment to the value of human life, provide an opportunity to invest in safe systems and a safer provision for healthy mobility. And they meet the objectives of post-COVID-19 economic stimulus. Thank you for listening. It is my great pleasure to introduce a pre-recorded speech by the Right Honourable Grant Shapps MP, Secretary of State for Transport.
Well, good afternoon everyone, and thanks first of all to the Road Safety Foundation for inviting me to take part in this virtual launch, and to Aegis Insurance for its continued support of the Foundation's work. It's a real achievement that in 2020 we're celebrating 2 decades of crash risk mapping in this country. My congratulations to everyone at the Foundation who's contributed to the development over those past 20 years. You've been part of a programme which has saved countless lives and significantly improved our understanding of road safety across the network. That's why we've been using risk mapping data since 2016 to underpin the Department for Transport's Safer Roads Fund, and why over 100 countries globally have also adopted this more proactive approach to road risk management. Now, it's thanks to the dedication of professionals like you that we've become a world leader in road safety. Yet, we are all here today because we know we can still do better. In 2018, Britain still lost 1,784 people to road collisions, and more than 27,000 people were seriously injured. Each fatality, a devastating tragedy for the families and the friends of those killed, particularly as so many victims are young. And there's a wider price to pay too. In 2018, we estimated that the cost to society of road crashes was £36 billion. That's equivalent to 1.7% of gross domestic product. Every year, more than 1.8 billion is diverted from elsewhere in the health budget to deal with preventable road crash injuries. And as we continue to battle COVID, we must strive more than ever to reduce such burdens on the health service. And that's precisely why risk mapping is so crucial. When the Road Safety Foundation started this work 20 years ago, around 13,500 miles of primary road network was included in the analysis. Today, we have data on 33,500 miles of A roads and motorways in Great Britain. And as a result, we were able to identify the 50 most dangerous A roads in Great Britain for our Safer Road Fund, and began working closely with the Foundation and 30 local authorities across England to roll out a targeted plan to make them safer. With sophisticated mapping now available, we're able to estimate that this vital work will save around 1,450 people from being killed or seriously injured on our roads over the next 20 years. I'm pleased to report that from the first group of 15 schemes funded in 2017, 12 have been completed, and the others are very close to completion too. And the 26 schemes funded in 2018 are all making good progress. In March this year, my Roads Minister, Baroness Veer, visited Sunderland's Phase 1 completed A1290 scheme, where pedestrians and cyclists, cycle infrastructure have been improved. The local authority are now assessing how nearby workers at sites such as the Nissan plant are utilising different modes of transport in the light of the nearby infrastructure improvements. But of course, road safety is not just about fixing roads, it's also about educating road users, from children to older drivers, motorcyclists, pedestrians and horse riders, and enforcing those rules of the road to encourage safer driving. Young males are the most vulnerable road users, particularly on rural roads. The department's Think campaign challenges masculine stereotypes of what makes a good driver and asks young men to look out for each other as part of the Mates Matter strategy. In 2019, Think ran a campaign for new drivers which included messaging encouraging them to watch their speeds when driving on rural roads, and, of course, at night. These videos impressively reached over 4 million people. As a direct result of the campaign, more than a third of new 17 to 24-year-old drivers were inspired to moderate their driving or to discuss the issues with friends and families. Future campaigns will explore good driving behaviour, continuing to highlight the risks of speeding, distraction and not wearing seatbelts. Alongside the excellent campaigning work of Think, more recently I commissioned work on the Smart Motorway Review, which led to 18 specific safety critical changes. We've also continued to gather evidence on our Roads Policing Review, which will shape the future of roads policing in this country to make sure enforcement evolves in response to changing patterns of road use. Key to this is the use of new technology and how it can help those charged with enforcing traffic laws. But I'm also incredibly interested in how we use car and road technology to improve driving and prevent accidents in the first place. And to return to the theme of mapping, we're also continuing to invest in our collision reporting and sharing crash system. This is made available free to the police and draws into data from a range of external sources to help them record and manage collisions. The next release later this year will link in local authorities as well as the wider police systems. These changes will enable forces across the country to bring offenders to justice faster, removing dangerous drivers from our roads. As technology evolves, the more important it becomes for us all to share the data and the knowledge. And it is in that spirit of sharing and never ceasing in our determination to keep pushing the barriers of road safety further that will continue to drive the partnership between government and the Road Safety Foundation and develop critical data from crash risk mapping over the next 20 years. So I'd like to once again thank you all for your work. I look forward to many more successful years of collaboration to help shape a better and safer Britain. Thank you.
Of course, go to the Secretary of State for Transport, the Right Honourable Grant Shapps. Joining Grant in supporting our work is now Hugh Merriman, MP and Chair of the Transport Select Committee.
Well, thank you for inviting me to speak to this important launch event. I'm really sorry I can't be here in person. I'd like to welcome the Road Safety Foundation's risk mapping report and also congratulate the Foundation on 20 years of crash risk mapping. I'd also like to thank Aegeus for their continued support of the Foundation's work. In 2016, the launch of the £100 million Safer Roads Fund by the Department of Transport has been developed on the basis of previous crash mapping reports, and that's a real testament to the impact and importance of the work of the Foundation. And I know that the Safer Roads Fund has allowed 30 local authorities to address 50 of the highest risk local A roads in England since 2016. And I know that well as a constituency MP down in East Sussex, because I'm afraid to say that the A259 and the A21 has appeared on the list of roads that need improvements. And it's as a result of the Foundation's work that I've been able to lobby Highways England to do more. And I think I've got better news on that front from RIS too. So I'll say a personal thank you from my constituents. Now, I know that there's a work which has been captured by local authorities, but there's also a lot more to be done. And there are some really interesting and constructive recommendations in the report, including arguing the case for long-term investment in road infrastructure, which I very much support. And I don't just support what we do from an MP perspective, but as chairman of the Transport Select Committee, we really do take your work as a base for the inquiries we cover on road safety. And I want to touch on some of the things we're doing at the moment and have done. So firstly, we are in the midst of an inquiry evidence session for why the young and novice driver class have such high collision rates. It's pretty tragic that they make up only 7% of driver license holders. They represent 21% of all car drivers killed or seriously injured. So we've taken evidence from road safety organisations as to additional measures that can help improve safety record. We're also going to take evidence from young people to find out whether they share in the desire to have those same restrictions. And we will ultimately hear evidence from the insurers, more groups, and the Roads Minister, Baroness Via. Like any select committee inquiry, we will make recommendations in our report, and the government can either accept those or reject them, but they have to do so with evidence. So we hope we can find a balanced way to improve road safety for young and novice drivers. In the last 5 years that I've been on the Transport Select Committee, albeit not as chairman, the committee has looked at road safety in a number of areas, and I was particularly heartened last year when we did an inquiry and then a report on mobile phone usage. As you may be aware, the law is not kept up to date with the technology, so it's still possible to text or take photos or video footage. If you don't communicate, then you're not actually causing an offence. So we made recommendations that that should be tightened up in law, and we await the government to do so, to confirm that they agree with us. So there's a lot that we're doing, and smart motorways is also another area I'll just touch on, because our work has sort of really shone a light on the issue around safe smart motorways, and the department's decision to undertake a review of safety on them, followed by sort of concerns raised by us and also media and members of the general public, is perhaps another example of our area of expertise shining a light as a result of reports such as yours, and then government not just taking note but taking action. So just to conclude, I'd like to finish by once again welcoming the Foundation's risk mapping report. It comes at a really critical time for road safety in the UK. As the report says, 20 years ago we had one of the lowest death rates on our roads per head anywhere in the world, but since then a host of European countries have caught up with us, and we're no longer the front runners we should be. So as chair of the Transport Select Committee, I'm committed to exploring the reasons why this is and providing the government with recommendations that improve our road safety record, and your work is vital in framing those terms of reference. So congratulations again, and next time I hope that I can say that to you in person.
Right, it falls to me now to pose some questions that you've been posing all afternoon, and goodness me, the inbox has gone mad. And Ant, you have stirred up some questions, sir, and I wonder if I could pose the first to you. It's from Nick Lomas, and Nick says, Ant said that we can control and manage infrastructure safety. Does Ant, a business leader and major insurer, think that halving road deaths must mean that general duties of safety on road authorities should be modernised too?
I wouldn't profess to understand all of the detail of how local road authorities are organised to be able to give a precise view, I guess. But from what I see, the disparate nature of responsibilities for road safety wouldn't strike me as the most effective and efficient approach. And I guess there should be good lessons to take from business. And if I think about the commercial world, there are three big things, I guess, that we would do to try and make sure that things are delivered on efficiently. The first would be to make sure that we've communicated very clear, very clear vision and purpose that unifies organisations and people. We establish a focus for the organisation by making sure that we're clear about the mission critical objectives and setting very clear measures to track them, and making sure that we embed innovation and continuous improvement to make sure we stay ahead. So that kind of unified, clear approach has certainly proven effective in our world and in business, and there may well be things there to reflect upon.
Thank you, Ant, very much indeed. A further question from Dan Campsell. Now, Dan has asked that globally, and I think this might be Susie, potentially, and Ant together, it says, globally, road safety leaders have actively re-engaged in addressing speed as the toxin in the safe system. Given the plateau since 2010, to what degree do you think the UK must address revisions to speed limits and speed management to avoid the story persisting for another decade? Susie, can I start with you? What are your thoughts?
Yes, I think Dan has a point here, and the global reinvigoration of interest in speed limits and speed management has got to be a good thing. Speed obviously plays an enormous role in every single crash. Every crash would be survivable at a speed. If we were crawling along at 2 miles an hour, we would survive, right? We've got this challenge to make sure that we can get from A to B on high priority roads, fast roads like motorways, at a sensible pace, haven't we? Otherwise our economy grinds to a halt. So we've got to get this right, and making sure that speed limits and speed management fits alongside the notion of functional speed, so the speed that you want to get from A to B on a particular road type, we've got to get that right really. So with motorways, yes, we need to be able to move traffic swiftly from major intercity kind of locations. Do we really need to be able to move people at 60 miles per hour on every single carriageway road? Possibly not, because their role in the hierarchy is to feed into those more primary routes. So I think we need to really think about that. We also need to think about the way that we combine motorised traffic moving at speed with vulnerable road users, because we know that above 20 to 30 miles per hour, your chances of surviving as a pedestrian or a cyclist really goes down if you're involved in a crash. So I think, again, we need to have a look at where we expect people to be using roads as vulnerable road users in anything over just a few, and make sure that speeds are sort of commensurate. Now, there are all sorts of funny interactions you get with speed management we probably don't have time for today, but just reducing speed limits doesn't necessarily give us the full answer. And in fact, it can have a very weird effect where people actually drive faster when you reduce the speed limit from 60 to 50, for example. So, you know, this is a really, really complex area, but we do need to revisit it, I do believe. I hope that was an okay answer.
That's a super answer, Susie. So comprehensive. I think that, Ant, you're off the hook.
Okay.
I think with time racing away from us and such a complete answer, thank you, Susie. Ant, take a breath. We have Edmund King, President of the AA, who has commented and said 20 years of crash risk mapping is a brilliant achievement. Well done. At previous launches, John Dawson would often quite rightly quote that we need 5-star roads, 5-star cars, and 5-star drivers. How are we doing there?
Shall I go again? Is that right?
Yes, why not?
Cars, we're doing really very well, aren't we? Vehicle technologies have improved enormously, and actually a lot of the pre-2011 sharp decline in road deaths can be attributed to advancements in the passive safety of vehicles. We're now seeing advanced driver assistance systems coming in, ADAS. New cars will have all of the ADAS systems by 2022, I believe. So we're set to reap some more benefit there. However, we do need the roads to be ready for those systems. So there's no good having no white lines if vehicles are needing white lines to keep you on them. So let's see if we can start to get the road markings a little bit improved. Are roads 5 stars? No, definitely not.
Where would you pitch it, Susie? 3?
Where would I pitch it? A really, really good motorway, 4-star probably here in the UK. Lots and lots of our single carriageway A roads, even those on the MRN, are coming out at 1 or 2 stars. So we have got a long, long way to go. And that's why these investment packages are so important. We can eke those up, the star ratings up, we can save lives, and we can do that in an economically sensible way where we get really good returns for our investment.
So we're talking about 5-star cars, less onus on the driver. So we're talking about potentially 4 or 5-star drivers, and it's the roads where we need to do a little bit of work. Yeah.
I think the roads are lagging behind a little. So yeah, I think we could really do something special there.
Superb. One final question before we finish today. So from Angela Byrne, it says, is the information on the investment package available for highways authorities to understand the exact extents and how the package has been developed?
Brian, do you want to cover some of that?
On the slides that Susie and I both know we're talking about here, you can see where we think the investment should be targeted. The assumptions are all in the report, so we do take you through it, but it is based on assumed numbers from crash. So in some cases, it might be some of the crashes we've got allocated to a different road from the relevant road authority, but that's something that we'd highly recommend you know, at the very first stage of looking at the feasibility of different options. The first step, we'd always recommend talking to the relevant local authority to make sure that we've got the data behind our you know, our suggestions right. So I think that's key. Susie, I've filled for time. Do you want to answer?
Yeah, so the detail of how we've arrived at the answers that we've arrived at, as Brian says, is covered in the report. And if you want to have a look at the interactive tools that are on our website, you can have a look and zoom in and zoom out and see which roads are in your patch. And Angela is in Wales, so these are the roads where we believe you're going to get your best returns if you've not already done something to them that we don't know about, because we haven't consulted on this. And if we've got the underlying crash numbers correct, which again we haven't consulted on every single route on here. So this is our initial cut prior to consultation, each road network in the report has got a line in a table 2, I believe, where it outlines how much the investment might be, how many facing serious injuries we think would be saved over the next 20 years if you upgraded those, and yeah, benefit cost ratios and so on. So have a look at that. We're very happy to share our data and work through those with you in whatever detail you need to.
That's wonderful, Susie. Thank you so much. Right, that brings to an end that question and answer session, but there will be answers provided to those who did ask questions, but sadly we didn't have the time to answer them today. It remains to thank Ant Middle very much indeed for your time today, for your support. And we're going to go and have a lie down in a dark room for about 3 or 4 minutes and catch our breaths, and then come back for an interactive webinar. So stay with us. We'll be maybe 3 minutes, no more, and we'll be back, and then we get fired into our second round. So thank you all, and we'll see you soon. Welcome back. So, welcome everybody to the Road Safety Foundation's interactive webinar. We hope that you found the 2020 launch of the EuroRAP Great Britain results interesting, and many thanks of course to all our speakers. This session focuses on work undertaken by some of our partners. As before, if you've got questions, please submit these in the Q&A area. Or if you're on YouTube, drop a comment. We'll do our best to answer questions live, but if we don't get to yours, we'll answer it over the next few days. And if you want to upvote, remember that thumbs up, which raises the question up and makes it more popular. Then you can press the thumb and give that question a better shot of being answered. Dr. Sue Sharland, who's the chair of the Road Safety Foundation's Management Committee and trustee of the charity, joins us, along with Dr. Susie Charman, on the panel alongside our speakers. I'll now hand over to Nicola Floodgate from Kent County Council.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. My name is Nicola Floodgate, as you've explained, from Kent County Council, and I'm the Schemes Planning and Delivery Manager. So my job is traditionally to manage the team of engineers that looks to design engineering schemes to make roads safer. And historically, this was done through crash data from Stats 19 from the police. Once it'd been validated and cleaned, it was often took some time to get to us and is often criticised for being a rather reactive and perhaps a difficult way of actually dealing with risk. And reputationally, we often find as a local authority that we are being accused of waiting for people to be injured before we indeed act. So the crash risk mapping reactive was a traditional approach, and what we had is this opportunity with the Road Safety Foundation and the Safer Roads Fund project that the DFT supported, that offered us an opportunity to use the star rating and be more proactive in our approach. this has offered us so many great learning points that we'd like to share with you today. So the star rating process. So what we decided in Kent is that we have the major road network. It's a really important network of roads that sit beneath the strategic road network. And whilst it may have greater funding opportunities in the future via the vehicle excise duty, at the moment that is not necessarily coming through. So as an authority, we wanted to use this star rating process to demonstrate to central government and indeed our own senior management that there is another way to prioritise investment. So look at the MRN. We decided that the major road network was a really good place to start. Carries a lot of traffic, heavily trafficked, really important route, and actually 4 times more likely for there to be a crash on the major road network than there is on the strategic road network. So we undertook the survey and the coding, which was a very simple thing to do, actually, a little bit of investment in an in-car camera, and then the model will look at the attributes on the road network, and it will model those attributes and what risks they present based on the safe system principles. And then it will estimate that what could happen, where crashes could take place. And then it would, the model, the kind of magic of the model is it would then trigger possible countermeasures in a way that perhaps traditional engineering techniques wouldn't normally do. The model would then rerun the scenario based on what would happen if those triggered countermeasures were put in place, and then it gives you a kind of cost benefit value for money rating to tell you where to invest, how to invest. So it's a really good tool, and we think the star rating process gives us a really good, compelling business case. And this is a slide that was used at the launch last year. So thank you for sharing that with us. But actually, it gives us an opportunity to share with our members the star rating maps. They're just a really usable kind of policy tool for us to share where we think we should be investing. So here in Kent, yes, you know, this is our vision. We don't want to stop with this. We have done some work coding our major road network. We've now got a very difficult job on our hands, because actually we know that we probably need somewhere between 50 and 60 million pounds to be able to bring our roads up to the level that we would like, which is 3-star rating where at all possible, or at least 2-star rating. It offers us this opportunity to be innovative and use our technical expertise and extend our technical expertise. It's enabling us to educate our members about where risks are and what inherent risk on our network exists. And again, as I've mentioned, it's helpful in terms of leveraging funding opportunities. So if you know the county of Kent, it's a very large shire with over 5,000 kilometres of roads. We have a lot of the roads. When I listened earlier to Eddie and Susie talking about the country lanes, we have a lot of rural roads in Kent, and they do present some really difficult challenges for us. They're really important routes. They're very difficult to treat with traditional engineering measures, and some of the countermeasures that the EuroRAP and the VIDA model gives us are actually very simple and can be used. For example, edge of carriageway lining that is raised so that the vehicle and any overrunning is picked up and mistakes can be kind of rectified. So we have a really large road network. Where do we start in terms of investing in our network? You know, it's an endless list of where we act. So at the moment, we use our crash cluster sites. We look at where people are being injured. But what we really want to be doing is having a sustained program of investment in our infrastructure. So we felt that by coding our network, we would sort of understand the scale of the ask. And this may enable us to get more funding from the local transport block allocation that comes into the authority. And it may also give us the opportunity to bid for other pots of money when they become available. what you see on the right of the screen is just a shot of one of our surveys that we've done, and we found it really invaluable to have those as a tool, as a reference tool really, to go back to when we're trying to understand exactly what's going on, why are crashes happening at certain locations. And then the modelling tool, the image on the left, the modelling tool suggests what you could do at certain locations based on this long list of countermeasures. And what we found in Kent is you can actually tweak the countermeasures that the model will give you. You can say, for example, please don't offer me swathes of barriers because in this location I know that won't be appropriate, and then it will give you alternatives. Now, this doesn't replace our engineers, and this slide really is just to show you we did a lot of training with our team, and we had some very long-standing highway engineers that had some reservations about perhaps the approach that we were going to be taking on. But I'm pleased to say that everybody has welcomed the approach with open arms. I think we think in Kent that this isn't a magic wand, it isn't a kind of black box model that's going to fix the roads without any sort of thinking. There is still that need to have our engineers look at the suggestions that the model gives us, look at those countermeasures and adjust them as appropriate depending on the location. It might be a very might be a conservation area, and some of the measures won't be it won't be that sensitive to know what to suggest to us. But the training opportunities it's given us, I think, have been really welcomed by our team. So kind of why are we doing this? We want to understand the risk and we want to affect that risk. So you can see, hopefully you can see clearly here some of the risk by star rating. So obviously the black is the worst. We don't have any, I don't think, or very little green, so the sort of good star rating roads. And this was quite a shock actually to our members. And what it did is it enabled us to prioritise very quickly, visually, where we should be looking in more detail and where perhaps that we could intervene in a different way, whether it be through education campaigns or other tools rather than the sort of hard engineering. But we're using the information that the tool gives us, the risk worms, and we're trying to affect that risk. So the model gave us, for every route, it gave us the Safer Road Investment Plans, the SRIPs. So based on a series of countermeasures along a series of routes, we were able to see what the number of fatal and serious injuries saved was, and then the value based on some adjusted local prices based on the work that we did with the DFT. So we know we got information from our contractor about what these countermeasures may cost. And then we got a BCR value. And now BCR is important to the government. It's not necessarily important when we're trying to sell projects to local communities. For us, it's about explaining that to our local communities. And what we're finding at the moment with the A290 and the A252 that were funded by DFT's Safer Roads Fund, we are finding local communities don't necessarily understand why we're acting and why we're reacting when they haven't seen a cause, so they can't understand why the focus is there. So I think there's a little bit of education that we need to be doing, and we're trying to do, to explain that we're not doing what we've always done. We're not waiting for somebody to be killed. We're actually trying to be proactive. We're trying to look at if a crash happens, or when a crash happens, can we make it less severe? And that's obviously the concept of what the Road Safety Foundation have been sharing. This just gives you a couple of scenarios really. The cost of a number of the countermeasure packages is very, very high. There's a basic level of countermeasure, there's an advanced level, and then there's the ambitious level. So we've looked at various scenarios. I think we ended up with 9 different SRIPs based on whether we were going to take a basic approach or an ambitious approach. And if any of you watching have used the VIDA tool, it does take a fair amount to go through, but the value in what you get out of it is extremely good, because the model will suggest a solution and then it will look for another solution, and it might find that that actually gives you a better saving, and therefore it will disregard the previous one. Now, like I said earlier, it doesn't replace the traditional engineering role. It's really important for us to have that time spent. It isn't simply a case of trying to take out the role of, you know, the accident investigation role. We still very much need that, but this just gives us an opportunity to look at alternative ways of prioritising, really. So I think I just want to finish before I open for questions, just to explain really the why and the benefits. I mean, we've spent a reasonably small amount of money working with the Road Safety Foundation when we compare what we spend with other consultancies or advisory sort of functions. And we've not only have we got more intelligence about our own network, which is really, really important, but we've also got a longer, more sustainable sustained program now. That is the only way that we think with government we'll be able to secure funding. We think we can show them there's value for money, and we can show that we're being proactive. We will always have the traditional kind of cluster site approach, but we're really looking forward to being a bit more proactive and not having to kind of rebut the argument that you're waiting for people to be injured before you intervene. So bit of a whistle-stop tour, but happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kate, very much indeed. There have been some questions that have arisen as a result of your presentation, so thanks for that. And I'll go to the first question, which is Nick Hughes. And Nick has asked, is there an increase in funding coming to accompany the major road network to enable proper schemes to be implemented? What do you think?
It's a fantastic question, and probably one that I would be asking as well. Not that I'm aware of per se, but obviously the vehicle excise duty is offering that, but we don't know how that's going to actually make its way down to the teams, the local authority teams like myself. So it may be actually, before I finish, Susie may have something to add on that, but as far as I'm aware at the moment, we haven't got a new sort of funding opportunity coming. But personally at Kent County Council, we think we will be able to secure more investment in road safety from our own coffers, if you like, if we use this intelligent approach.
Susie, anything much to add to that?
Yeah, I think part of what we're trying to achieve with Nicola's rather visionary approach, may I say, is that we are trying our best to make that investment case for the MRN, so that when the funds do become available, we are ready to go, and that also that we make that the case for the MRN funding to not just be for bypasses and major projects, but also for large-scale road safety remedial measure programs across all of the network, not just improving tiny bits that they're absolutely fantastic, but let's bring up the whole safety standard of the MRN. You know, it might not reach amazing, will save many, many, many lives, as we've outlined in the report that we've launched today. So this is all about building that momentum, building the evidence base behind that call for investment on the MRN, and for some of those funds that are currently destined for major projects to make their way through to safety practitioners like Nicola and her team, who are doing a terrific job with very, very little funds at their disposal. We need to make sure for the profession that they have the opportunity to put in place their skills and their knowledge so that they can actually make a difference on their networks.
Fabulous, thank you, Susie. And there's a question coming from Kate Carpenter, and it's a long question, so I'll summarise if I may. And it basically talks about active travel and the improvements that to mortality and morbidity rates that active travel brings over motor vehicles, and asks how EuroRAP will reflect the requirements of the gear change report in future work to better reflect harm per mile by user group.
Shall I take that one? So within the crash risk mapping, we're constantly looking at ways of getting our denominator, our per billion vehicle kilometres, more reflective of the amount of harm per for vulnerable road users per travel that they make. So that's the first thing to say. In terms of the EuroRAP methodology, which is the proactive survey methodology, that already has star ratings for both pedestrians and pedal cyclists already embedded within it. We're doing a huge amount of research and development across the globe on this, but also here in the UK through the Road Safety Trust project that we have been fortunate enough to be awarded, where we're looking at improving the countermeasure programs that are generated through the EuroRAP survey, improving those for vulnerable road users and the urban situation. This is probably the greatest challenge that we face currently as a profession, is how do we get fit, active, and do that whilst keeping them safe. You are very vulnerable as a vulnerable road user, surprisingly. It's a truism. There's a reason why we're calling pedestrians and cyclists vulnerable road users, and that's because you get hit by a motorised vehicle going above about 20 or 25 miles per hour, and this is not a good thing to occur. We know that. Let's see if we can get more pop-up facilities. Let's see if we can find space to allow people that little bit of extra space at the edge of a rural road where you can run by the side of the white line. It's simple stuff that works not only for vulnerable road users, but for motorised traffic as well. Big challenge, enormous challenge. Thank you for that, Kate. It's probably a very, very long-winded answer. And I'd love to debate that more with Kate over the coming weeks, because I think we do need to try and figure out how we solve this problem.
Thank you, Susie, very much indeed. Nicola, thank you. Let's move on now to Dr. Sam Chapman from Flow. Sam, it's all yours.
So I'm here to talk about how telematics data can be used to enhance road assessment programs. So first of all, for those that aren't totally aware of telematics, it monitors the behaviour of individual driver risk using a whole range of technology that's fitted into vehicles in order to monitor those vehicles' movements, but it's focused on the individual. It's about building a picture of risk. Unlike RAP programs, it's building data to understand that individual passage of that vehicle. Now, the question behind this is, obviously that can be built up to get aggregate information by location to build a picture of actually what behaviour is like by location, which can start to think about how that behaviour could be impacted, could be used in road assessment programs in order to make them improved, better, in some way or other. Now that's an open question, can it be done? This was an investigation we've undertaken. What you can see here is a range of different behaviours on this graph, from the pink dots that are moving out the same junction at the same time, all of which different humans drive very differently out of the same junction at the same time in the same conditions. And taking that knowledge and applying it across the road network, we can start to actually see how can we use this data to apply into road assessment programs. This is one of the things that we're investigating alongside the Road Safety Foundation in work supported by DFT and TTRIG, with investigations looking at how we can build and understand potential new factors that could be incorporated to enhance road assessment. So this particular investigation was focused in the West Midlands area, so used the entirety of the West Midlands and every vehicle journey that we have recorded across multiple years in that area for every sub-second of those motions of the journeys. So this is very large amounts of data, many millions and millions of miles compiled together to build up additional information about the locations on which RAP programs are looking.
Sorry to bother you.
Yeah.
Mid-flow, we haven't seen any progression of slides. You're still on your title slide.
Ah, interesting.
Sorry.
Interesting. Don't ask me why.
It seems unresponsive to arrows. It might be better with clicks.
Right, I think I figured it out. Can you see something now?
Yes.
Right, here's the pink dots I was on about. Here's where the behaviour changes, and you can start to see that behaviour moving over the roads. But what I was trying to get to was obviously the programme that we have been involved with, the Road Safety Foundation, which is undertaken in the West Midlands area. And this is billions and billions of points of data, millions and millions of journeys over multiple years, to look at that behaviour in fine-grained detail and compare that to be able to see, is there ways to improve road assessment programmes, is there ways to make them better? So already road assessment programmes take an awful lot of characteristics into account. They take into account all sorts of information, street lighting, the degrees of roadworks, the infrastructure on the side of the road that you may actually have a potential of colliding with, in terms of building up factors for risk as you travel down an individual road. What we're looking for is what additions can be taken potentially from the advancement of looking at behavioural data. So behavioural data taken from telematics gives a wider picture of what behaviour is like at locations. Now, already within the road assessment programme, there are some aspects associated to behaviour, of course, particularly speed being a very important feature of behaviour and a fundamental one for the assessment of road assessment programmes. But there is much more that could be looked at in terms of evaluating how can they help to predict and can they improve the potential for road assessment. The project we've been looking at is to create a whole series of analysis, building up patterns of behaviour by location to build factors that are for consideration in road assessment programmes. And the aim of this is to build the predictive accuracy. Not necessarily this would impact star ratings, but it may well impact fine-grained understanding of an individual road and its assessment of what countermeasures to deploy. So as an example on this particular slide, which is looking at the maximum speed, which is looking at maximum speed across Birmingham, Coventry, from a period of 2 years of travel across a 7 to 9 AM period on Tuesdays to Thursdays. So we break them down into typical periods of day, typical times, and start looking at that and combining it with data when crashes actually occur. Start looking for the correlators to see which of these factors could potentially be additive in predictive value to improve RAP programs in the future. So a whole series of these have been evaluated. Some of them are here, and they're not all speed related, they're time related, they're aspects of acceleration and behavior, the frequency of stops and starts, the dynamics of the vehicle, the full physics of the vehicle in terms of their kinetic energy, i.e. the potential for a vehicle to impact damage at particular locations, which varies up and down the road network as vehicles move. So taking that into account, we can start to look at these to try and work out which of these can impact into road assessment programs. Now, looking at the aspects already within the road assessment programs, such as speeds, these are taken from either road surveys, ANPR surveys, traffic models, or existing understanding of what speeds are on existing roads. However, that typically lacks the fine-grained detail of the exact slowdown and speed up on every corner and bend that doesn't necessarily give the right inputs into a road assessment model. So this may be one area that could be improved. So we've evaluated that, and on the right here you can see the overall speed differences, as most of them in the centre around the speeds that are being used in existing road programs. However, there are differences, and we can see those differences from fine-grained data compared to those used as input into models. So correcting these may have an impact which affects the output of these models. In fact, we did that across all road assessment programs that we had access to across the West Midlands area, and tested that for the fine-grained understanding of segment by segment of what the differences were to do with the fatality estimations and the serious injuries. And there are some variations. Obviously, they centre around the same core, which is good because it means there is a very good understanding of road assessment programs as it stands. But there is some room for improvements in terms of that fine-grained predictivity at that local level, which is particularly important when it comes back to understanding what mitigations we most suited to solve a particular problem at a location. If we look at this on an individual road, so those familiar with a risk worm will know that going down a road, risk changes over the course of that road. So you'll see from the traditional speeds included and the telematic speeds, there's subtle differences that will then lead to different levels of risk. What's being plotted here is the levels of risk on each of these sections of road as calculated through RAP models. And you'll see that from the beginning of this particular stretch of road, the telematic speeds were actually in excess of those known by authorities and used in the models that were actually used to set up. which means that the estimation of risk in those particular locations was actually downplayed. At the far right, you'll see that it's the opposite, where actually the traffic is slower than predicted over the whole course of the road, which means that there is a difference in risk again. So these fine-grained understandings of risk, although not typically affecting the star rating of individual roads, they do affect the fine-grained understanding of the risk levels and the potential mitigations at individual component parts. So evaluating across all these sorts of factors, not just speed, various other factors, we've been looking at the potential for these to be added into future models. What we've come up with is that there is a predictivity in behavioural aspects. However, behavioural aspects alone are not very predictive to add in immediately. They need to be considered in the context of the location alongside other factors to have predictive uplift to be able to improve the models from where they stand. That's not to say that it can't be done, but further work is needed. There is a strong recommendation, however, that accurate speed data that does differ up and down with accurate locational recording is used within road assessment models. Where this is available, it does cause a difference in terms of the outcome, and it does cause a difference in terms of the countermeasures that are there, making them more accurate for the localized locations where they may be being considered. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is take these values, and we're continuing this work to investigate a larger number of potential additions to better understand risk over the road assessment programme. And what we're doing now, what we've done now in the West Midlands, we're seeking to do on a wider basis across the UK, alongside the Road Safety Foundation, to improve road assessment programmes and help more people get better understandings of risk. That was a very quick introduction to the things we've been doing.
Sam, wonderful work there. Thank you for that. We've got questions. We have questions for you, my friend. Now then, Richard Owen asks, he says, data from individual telematics providers only make up a tiny proportion of vehicle traffic and may not present a true reflection of all traffic types. How can we understand weaknesses in this data source versus traditional data collection methodologies? I suspect you have an answer off the top of your head.
I do, yes. There is a lot of, you're right, that every data source has its concerns in terms of the speed. If you compare it to traditional methods, traditional methods are taken from either spot surveys, counts at fixed locations, and then estimating the speeds in between those fixed locations, meaning there is no fine-grained information in between. What we're really adding here is not necessarily a direct measure of speed, but we're seeing where it goes up and down over the course of these stretches of road, which is very important for calculating that risk adjustments that may need to be made into road assessment programs. Now, there can be bias in telematics data sets. The data set that we've used comes from the largest set in the UK of telematics data, and it does consist of policyholders from a large number of UK insurance brands. Which means that it does represent a wide range of society. Now, that said, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a perfect view. What we do lack in the data that we have is HGV data. So a perfect view of this would be to incorporate multiple sources of data to improve the system even again further. However, based on traditional views of speed, using telematics data, and telematics data, as we've suggested in this, is a huge improvement of localized understanding of risk.
Super. Thank you, Sam. I knew you'd know it off the top of your head. Susie, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Just that in terms of Sam's work, the thing that really makes me happy is that when we do an EuroRAP survey, at the moment we're applying a spot speed survey across quite a long stretch of road, which is effectively what we're talking about here. So his data far more granular. So that the benefit here is that imagine you've got a really sharp bend, and at the moment we have to assume that the 85th percentile speed and mean speed are the same as the stretch before the bend, right? So we might in our EuroRAP recommendations be saying, oh, the bend's really dangerous, but in actual fact what people might be doing is reading the bend perfectly fine and slowing nicely down, taking the bend nice and easy, and able to cope with it without any bother. So SAM's data and the sort of granular telematics data allows us to then say, actually, speeds are lower, we don't have to worry about that bend, nobody's coming off it anytime soon, don't treat here, but here is a greater priority down the road. And that's all that we want to do. We want to make sure that the prioritisation is right in the EuroRAP tool, that we save as many lives as we can, and that we make the best investment decisions that we can. Sue, have you got anything to add to that one?
Yeah, thanks, Susie. I was going to say that's a great presentation, Sam, a really great example of how accelerated and intelligent data capture should be able to help us not only proactively enhance our proactive assessment of risk, but also target the investment, as Susie was just saying there. And ultimately, these different technologies to help us do this all feeds into an initiative we've got at the international level in the EuroRAP programme called EuroRAP, which is basically about accelerated intelligent collection of data using a range of technologies to really help hone the models and help hone the business cases and the proactive measures and so on. So great example, Sam.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Well done. And it's time to move on. Thank you, Sue. Now we have the wonderful Chris Furno from EuroRAP. Chris?
So good afternoon, everyone. Just to introduce myself, I'm EuroRAP's UK technical skill leader. So I'm responsible for our internal investments, research and development in the highway space. Really pleased today to talk to you about what we've been doing in a road safety space in the context of a design consultancy, with a focus on how do we fit that into a wider social and environmental outcomes that sit around it. So across our global business, we've been looking at how do we develop an outcome-led design approach that links to the UN SDGs we heard about earlier, and ultimately there brings that driving focus into what that does in terms of road safety. So firstly, it's important to set a bit of context as EuroRAP's a slightly different organisation to a number that you may be aware of. We're independent employee owned. And a lot of the culture in the organisation is set from a key speech given by EuroRAP in 1970. Although that might sound a long time ago, actually some key themes of that around total architecture, humane and social usefulness are very relevant today and very much relate back to the SDG agenda and road safety beyond that. So that really is driving our focus at the moment around total design and outcome-led design. Our ownership structure also means we're able to prioritise investments on things that align to those wider aims. So in my presentation today, I'm going to talk about outcome-led design approach we've been developing, and then how that relates more specifically into the testing and adoption of road safety star rating for designs. So we've heard mention of them already, but just to recap, the Sustainable Development Goals are a collection of 17 goals, designed as a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for us all. They were set by the United Nations in 2015 and intended to be achieved by 2030. And the UK government is committed to delivering those both at home and in the involvement of places abroad. So choosing to focus our business on aligning around those has brought a number of areas into sharp focus about how we can have a greater impact than we had been. And one of those is clearly road safety. Where there is a clear link between what we do in the design and the advice we provide to our clients and the SDG targets, and more specifically the targets around halving deaths and serious injuries on roads. The diagram just makes the point though that a lot of this is a balance between planetary outcomes and societal outcomes. And there are a host of goals in the middle that are the ones that actually a lot of infrastructure design delivers around communities, around energy, water, and the wider economy. So within EuroRAP, how do we bring that higher level intention into the projects we're delivering? This is where the outcome-led design methodology we've been developing creates that touch point between the SDGs, the wider aspirations around circular economy, net zero in terms of carbon, and our core business of developing transport solutions for clients. Usually this is as simple as a key step at the start or regularly through a project of asking the right broad questions of teams to ensure that they are focused on the overall outcome. And that keeps it there at the forefront of what those teams are doing. We'd like to think we We do that, and we have been doing that for a number of years, but the ambition of the methodology is to try and systemize that a bit more, thinking and the approach to keep it there in the current mind of projects throughout the life cycle, encourage the discussions with clients and funders. So to bring this into the road safety domain, I've mentioned a few of these already, and I'm just going to reiterate that sort of filter down from our point of view. SDG number 3 is very much around health and well-being, and that feeds into that clear target around road safety. Our outcome that we've developed in that space, it reflects that, but actually builds on it slightly more. I think Eddie Izzard's video earlier was very much about how you feel as well as actually what the risk level is. So we want people to feel safe if you're using roads as well as actually be safe. And those high-level outcomes then bring us into areas around safe system models or the decade of action targets of actual tangible things we can do on our projects. So that approach within EuroRAP made us really sit there and think about what is the current influence and involvement we have across those different aspects of road safety. And actually it showed as an organisation we have a lot of involvement across all the aspects. We have a good influence across both vehicle design through to safe road use, and then as you may expect as a predominantly design company, the good safe designs of roads. But it also has led us how we can do more. How can we not just do the sort of minimum compliance aspect? And in terms of road safety, that's then led us into what the decade of action targets are, and more specifically, how does this star rating measure apply into the business and the schemes we deliver? So just to recap, I think we've probably already covered a lot of these to some extent, but the star rating is the proactive measurement of the infrastructure risk to an individual road user. Traditionally, as was explained earlier, it's about going out, doing a video survey, coding a number of attributes along the network to give you that star rating, that improvement that then allows you to go out and plan and deliver improvements on an existing network. Star rating for designs is based on, well, actually, before we build that new road, let's get the star rating. So let's code the attributes off a plan. And then look at actually what we can do, what we can change about that to really improve the safety of it before we go out and physically build the road. So over the last year, we've been working very closely with Road Safety Foundation and EuroRAP, initially to train a broad cohort of our staff on the star rating process and the online platform of VIDA. So we've trained engineers, transport planners, road safety auditors to get that broad understanding and appreciation. We then coded 2 of our recent design projects to really test the process and understand the value of the outputs we get from it. This has allowed us to better understand what it's telling us, but also actually started to look at how can we use the information in our BIM models to semi-automate the process of generating star ratings. And that has shown at this stage a number of key areas where it is adding value. It is highlighting things that are good to talk about with design teams or clients. Firstly, yes, we can do a tick. We can go, we've designed a 3-star road. And that's valuable, that's important, and we think it will become more important. But the second 2 probably are the more useful things from a design point of view. One is the risk mapping. So the worm, as it's termed, in the top right. Along the route, that allows us to understand where the risk profile changes. And the big spike you may just be able to make out is a junction. Well, you could assume we can't remove the junction, but actually have we really challenged that? Have we gone, can we do something different here to bring that risk level down? The second bit at the bottom is actually better understanding around the cost benefits. So the 2 rows in it is actually the difference in FSIs on the existing road versus our design. And it's actually giving us a feel of what level of benefits might there be. How do they reflect to other measures that may be presented in economic cases for schemes? And then the final bit, just probably a little bit too small for people to read, but the intervention plan actually starts to say, well, okay, we've designed the road to standard, but are there different things we can do to take it that step beyond to really improve and reduce the risk level further as far as we can? So we really believe that these type of measures are going to become a lot more important for people to report, and especially as we move more and more away from purely talking about transport interventions on journey times and actually start considering the wider benefits and societal expectations. So that work to date has shown that actually there is a number of areas where we think it is a very useful tool to take forward. I'm not going to talk through all 7 of the items, but there's clear aspects early on in a project where we're looking at feasibility or options assessment, and some of the cross-section tools, how you could use it as a corridor and option comparison tools can really help that early on decisions about which is the best route, which is the best cross-section for a scheme. Then when you move into preliminary and detailed design, it's about, well, yes, we can get a full star rating, but actually what does that risk profile do in supporting departures from standard if they're required, or looking at improvements to develop the scheme further in terms of reducing that risk rating. And then finally at the bottom, actually, there's a real question about how do we use that to understand customer experience, going back to how do people feel about the road. Star rating is something that allows us to understand that better, and also then start looking at how we can make sure we've got strong and robust cases for economic investments. So just in summary, I'm not suggesting star rating for design means we throw away the design manuals and the road safety audits and all the other stuff we've done for a number of years. They all have a really strong and important and robust process. But what it does do is it does give us a good complementary tool that really helps push projects, push designers, push the development schemes to make sure the road is as safe as it can be and not just a minimum level of compliance. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris, very much indeed. Questions have been bouncing in like mad whilst you were speaking. And one is really intriguing me because it's about behaviour change. And so there's an awful lot around how we go about designing better roads, but people are inherently a bit daft sometimes. And this question's from Kirstine Keane, and she says, a lot of drivers who are against active travellers argue that cyclists don't have good enough understanding of the highway code and basic rules, and that they should have to pass a driving theory test to improve behaviours on the roads. It's probably not one for EuroRAP, but what do you think, personal level? What do you reckon?
As a cyclist, I think there is, all road users have an obligation. When we say road users, that's not just the car drivers, that's the cyclists, that's pedestrians. And yes, everyone has an obligation to understand it. One thing that we have actually been doing that sort of touches on this is what can we do to help road users understand and use the infrastructure in the right way? So how can we lay out signs in a better way so people understand them more naturally? We always see the lovely pedestrian routes where people cut the corner because they follow the quickest route. So actually there is a behavioural element in the designs we produce that gives the user the right cues, as well as potentially a wider education piece for road users.
And we're seeing that more and more in our own personal lives with COVID and how we deal with 2 metre social distancing, that better signage leads to better outcomes.
Yeah.
And better design of systems leads to better outcomes. So thank you for that, Chris. Really appreciate that. It's time to move on. You're off the hook because we're now going to hear from Richard Nixon from Transport for Greater Manchester.
So thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of Chris at this event. So I'm Dr. Richard Nixon. I'm the Cycling and Walking Programme Director at Greater Manchester. And I think the original brief for this chat was along the lines of the great reallocation. And so there was an opportunity during the heart of lockdown that we seem to have come out of for a while to undertake some significant road space reallocation. And it was partly prompted by a number of things, and John just alluded to that in the sense of, in some areas, and we were at the forefront of that arguably, the opportunity to create extra road space for pedestrians and cyclists in the form of social distancing measures. And we allocated around about £5 million of our Mayor's Challenge Fund, which is actually targeted at longer term measures, to those short-term activities, to significant effect in parts of central Manchester and a number of all of the boroughs that make up the Greater Manchester family. Subsequently, obviously, the government then released their guidance for and a programme of change under the Emergency Active Travel Banner. So I'm going to concentrate on emergency active travel responses here. Yes, next slide, please, Susie. So this slide shows up to about mid-end June the effect on travel that we saw across Greater Manchester. And for those of us responsible for and keen to see promotion of active travel, you'll see that we saw significant growth in cycling, which is the dotted and solid grey lines. And what we saw was consistent growth above both pre-COVID levels and also normal annual averages, right through towards the mid-end of June. As lockdown measures began to be eased towards the right-hand end of this graph, we did see consequential increases in other road traffic. And in common with most other areas, and I'll come on to that later on in the deck, we have now seen a growth up to near normal levels of traffic flow, and that's had consequential effects, therefore, I'm sorry to say, on active travel. We are still in Greater Manchester at quite low levels of public transport take-up, although we have seen growth in that as well, particularly since the opening up of the schools arena. Next slide, please, Sue. So during the lockdown period, we took an opportunity to carry out a sort of snap survey of the communities of Greater Manchester. And one of the things that we found was that people were telling us that their experiences of lockdown, so that's much reduced road traffic, was having positive impacts on their attitudes towards the opportunities for active travel. 3 in 10 people said they found walking and cycling a good way to get around during lockdown. And we did a lot of things to assist key workers in particular. So, for example, we worked with the hospital trusts in Greater Manchester to facilitate access to loan bikes for key workers, because simply the transport services were not there. And at the time they needed to arrive, they had to make use of walking and cycling, and it wasn't that easy to get hold of bikes. A fifth of those who responded said they felt safer due to less traffic, which is kind of fairly self-evident potentially. And nearly half claimed that their experience of walking and cycling during lockdown will prompt them to do so more often. So that's very encouraging for me in terms of the responsibilities I have on behalf of the Mayor and the Commissioner. And 1 in 10 also said they'd recently bought or were considering buying a bike. Now, anybody else who's attempted to buy a bike recently probably will know that that is very much the case, that it's very hard to get hold of a bike at the moment. Those figures are also reflected more recently, since around about mid-late July into early August, we recommenced our training programme face-to-face for individuals and also groups. And we've seen a 340% increase in training. So that hopefully perhaps answers some of the questions in the chat, which is that new cyclists are electing to take training where it's available, which is very, very positive. Next slide. Now, set against that, and again, this probably chimes with some of the comments in the chat and also Eddie's very pertinent points about the fear of traffic, and that other road users' behaviour would continue to be deterrents towards walking and cycling after lockdown. And unfortunately, we've probably begun to see the effects of that. So despite some improvements we've made, increased levels of traffic have caused a deterrent effect. And so what residents said to us, and this echoes in what the government have asked us to do, they'd like to see us try and lock in the benefits of what was experienced during lockdown. So we've proposed to government quite an ambitious programme of emergency active travel measures, something in the region of £15 million additional expenditure on top of our considerable investment in cycling and walking in Greater Manchester. Next slide, please. And I think listening to the debate today, and I also saw a comment from my colleague Nadeem Mohammed in the chat, I think the EuroRAP approach, having had experience of it over a number of years ago, I'm glad to see one of the roads I used to be responsible for, the A534 in Cheshire, has now achieved a significant reduction in its risk rating. So very pleased to see the effectiveness of EuroRAP and IRAP approaches continuing on those roads. I think of increasing concern, however, to us in Greater Manchester is we have seen a significant spike, unfortunately, in fatalities in the last year and a half. And in particular, we are seeing similar levels to the national picture of vulnerable road users being overrepresented in that makeup. And very worryingly, early figures in 2020 suggest significant excess speed again, playing a significant part in those fatals. So 36% of all fatals at the moment have excess speed as a contributory factor. And one can only speculate that the low levels of traffic that we saw were corresponded by very high levels of speed and the obvious consequences that produced. So we do have a very real challenge and a very real need to provide the vulnerable road users with dedicated space. So I'm going to move now, Susie, on to the next slide, which begins to illustrate some of the attempts that we're making with our district partners to introduce that in these pop-up styles. So on the left, you can see Chris sitting there on one of his bikes doing a piece to camera. And that was the use of temporary planters, basically, to introduce a whole series of active neighbourhoods. We've got a long-term ambition for significant numbers of active neighbourhoods in Manchester. But the good thing about these temporary pop-up schemes is it enables you to test and experiment with those. The main picture is a slightly more, I suppose you could call it hardcore delivery of a filtered area right within the heart of the city centre. But that was also to complement efforts to provide and support social distancing in the Deansgate area, for example. Next slide. And these two examples show the use of pop-up facilities on the left-hand side to back up a currently white paint scheme, and both of these schemes are now being moved forward with emergency active travel funding and our local funding through the Mayor's Challenge Fund to permanent or semi-permanent and segregated schemes. The one on the right is an image from one of our major routes where one of the councils, Trafford Council, made a significant change to road space allocation by taking up a whole lane and dedicating that to emergency pop-up measures. And we're now working actively with them to see how we can continue that scheme. And did it work is the next slide. So what we can see, this relates to the study on the A56 in the recent past, is that up until around about the end of August, the scheme along the A56 basically bucked the trends despite rising traffic levels, and it's continued to rise. The red line shows the overall GM trend, and regrettably, in cycling, we're down to around about where we started from, so perhaps a few 10, 15% above. But along the A56, we were up into regions of 150 to 200% growth, and that has been sustained. And you can only conclude, although it's very early to make too many assumptions, the principal reason for that was the significant amount of road space reallocation that was given and the presence of physical segregation. That scheme is going to be modified in due course because there are growing concerns over congestion on the route, and we will continue therefore obviously to monitor the effect of that on cycling activity. But if we move to the next slide, I think one of the other interesting features about this, and this shouts out to the function of road space reallocation in the way that place can be improved. The significant move of traffic away from the curb line meant that cyclists could actually occupy a greater area of space. So what we saw, cyclists choosing a more positive position in the road further out on the carriageway because they felt able to be protected. And we saw significant changes in two-way flows. A concern for us, because of the focus of our efforts in Greater Manchester, is the bias towards male cyclists on this route. And one of the things we do want to investigate carefully is avoid falling into the pitfall of potentially just attracting the kind of high-speed male commuter. And actually, we want to have a balanced mix of cyclists and walkers. And finally, I think it goes without saying on the last slide We've attempted to communicate well to our residents and reassure them that using active travel was a means of being COVID safe, for want of a better word, to try and communicate to our road users why the road layout was changing and provide informative messaging for people making new journeys. And I think there were some conversations in the chat around, well, what's the role of risk mapping and EuroRAP type approaches and proactive assessment of roads? We have an approach which goes beyond LTM 120 in our Streets for All design check, and also our adopted design standards, which basically assess a route, including emergency active travel routes, whether they can be used by a competent 12-year-old, for example, the free-range 12-year-old riding the bike themselves, and also if facilities are suitable and have the appropriate layout for a double buggy user. And those two standards, very evocatively created by Chris, I think are a simple way to understand how to create sufficient space and scope for vulnerable road users. You've got to be capable of being used by a free-range 12-year-old, and infrastructure for walking needs to be appropriate for a double buggy user. Now, those two simple measures are a form of risk-based evaluation, I'd argue. They're backed up by much more detailed technical information, as you can imagine, but they are a clear way of communicating what we're intending to do. And that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Absolutely superb. Richard, thank you so much. I do have some questions for you though. And the first one came in from Matt Staton, and it was around emergency services and how have they been involved in the process of making sure that they have access whilst you have hard measures in place?
Sure. So the key thing is that we've had representatives, local community, first responders, so the fire service and police service, involved in consultation on any emergency active travel orders. And we've also set up, in the case of bus operators, a bus operator forum so that we can consult with bus operators as well. So we've attempted to ensure both we can support public transport users and taking into account the views of the emergency services. And many of the emergency active travel measures, although they are segregated, fire service operators will find a way through. I think there's a simple way to put it.
Enough said, Richard. Thank you. One final question, if I may, for today, which is, what chances are there, this is from Kirstine King, what chances are there that these schemes such as pedestrianising Deansgate become long-term measures to support Streets for All?
Well, we are all waiting with bated breath for the outcomes of Emergency Active Travel Fund Tranche 2. And I wouldn't like to prejudge the outcome of that, but we do have some significant proposals, I would say, for the regional centre. So let's hope we get the outcome we wish for and watch this space.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me that you've got a plan B. Good man, Richard. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you to all of the speakers who've taken part this afternoon in what has turned out to be quite an afternoon for road safety. It falls now for me to pass over to Dr. Sue Sharland, who's going to close today's session. So Sue, all yours.
Thank you, John. And I'm not going to attempt to summarise what we've heard today, because we've heard so much. It's been an absolutely marvellous look round loads of aspects of road safety. But I would like to add my thanks to John, to all of the speakers today, to John himself for facilitating so brilliantly. Thank you. And to everybody else involved in putting together today's programme and making it happen, and the technical bods behind. I think it's all gone very well indeed. But also I'd like to thank our participants today and all of you for joining us. Thank you so much for the excellent questions. As John said earlier, if there's anything you'd like more on, or you didn't get a chance to ask, please do come and talk to us. And we'd also really appreciate your feedback on today's session as well, and perhaps things you'd like to hear in future sessions. That would be much appreciated. So I think without further ado, I will thank you all, and wish you all a very pleasant sunny afternoon out there. Thank you.